Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue. We got a little behind the schedule, but we want to give everybody ample time and maybe even a little extra, if possible, as we go along. And the next presenter is going to be Michael Watson, who's going to be talking to us about hypnosis naturally. Sounds like a song, Michael. Yeah. And you all know Michael. I don't think he needs much of an introduction at this point. He's one of those icons in the industry that, as we were talking the other day, he's kind of one of the new living legends here. We're getting up into that range where he's done so much in the industry and so much groundbreaking work as far as online, getting us online, especially us older people, which is quite a task for some of us. And he is, of course, the main trainer for IACT. He does multiple certification trainings for them now. Started out with the Master Trainer's Trainer. Now he does a stress management consultant. And I don't even remember all the things he's doing, but there's multiple trainings he's doing. He is amazing. I call him my NLP guru. He is the best NLP trainer I have ever been in a room with. And I have been in rooms with multiple, probably at least a dozen or more NLP, very wonderful trainers through the years, and he is still the master to me. So you're in for a treat here. Always the wonderful outgoing vice president of HEA at this point, but we will still have him in the loop, Michael Watson. Let's give him a welcome.
Yay. Well, it's so wonderful to be here, you know, with all of you guys. Hypnosis naturally. Patty said it sounds like a song, and now I have, for those of you who are old enough to remember, I have Gilbert O'Sullivan in my head, right? Do we know this? Alone Again, naturally, that the comma, naturally. Gosh, I'm first of all in awe just sitting here of the experiences that we've already, had, and such great presentations, such a wonderful assembly of people and minds and and understandings to relate to. So I'm stunned. I have to tell you what happened. I had some computer challenges, and I'm actually working on the second computer. I got one and took it back a few weeks ago and started over again. And this one actually crashed on me last night. I think I've got it all worked out. But in the meantime, the document that had all of my notes for this presentation, the last save was missing. So I had sort of a partial document. So this morning I've taken some notes and added, and I'm watching Jan in particular, because Jan used to teach public speaking and stuff, and I know this is probably exactly what you told people to do, in class, because there are just so many ways for me to go in this conversation, and I hope that you will feel free to raise your hand. I've got you in gallery mode. So, so if you raise your hand or something, if you have a question, that would be helpful. And, and I'm happy to go where it is that that you take me with this, because that's the whole point of my conversation in terms of hypnosis naturally. Hypnosis is a naturally occurring phenomenon. It happens all the time. We're in trance a whole lot more of the time than we tend to think about. Because as hypnotists, somebody gave us the idea before we got into this profession that that people are out of trance until they go to the hypnotist, and then the hypnotist puts them under. I still don't even understand what that means. It's one of my favorite expressions that we have about hypnosis. Or somebody does hypnosis on you. I have every once in a while students from my class say, yeah, I went home and I did hypnosis on my sister. And I'm like, well, that's kind of an interesting idea, as though hypnosis is something that is imposed upon a person by an operator who's got the technique in order to do that. I always show, and I know some of you will have heard some of these things I'm going to say, again and again, but they're just such strong images in my head, because Patty's reference to Gilbert O'Sullivan, indirectly at least. I'm thinking that there is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that you all are familiar with, right? I'm wishing that there were a Hypnosis Hall of Fame. And you know that there is one technically, by the way, just because somebody's going to say, well, wait, there is one. There is one. But what it really is a filing cabinet at IACT. And, and every year they give somebody else the Hypnosis Hall of Fame, gets admitted to that collection of people. But if there were a brick and mortar building that was the Hypnosis Hall of Fame, I can't help but think that outside of that brick and mortar building, there would be a statue, because you can't have a Hall of Fame without a statue. And the statue of hypnosis would be two people, one of them a hysterical woman. I really appreciate that, by the way. The history of psychology is owed to hysterical women. Just ask Sigmund Freud, read the books. So there would be a hysterical woman, and she would be in a chair, perhaps leaning back like one of my favorite statue in the world, by the way, is Saint Teresa in ecstasy. Some of you might know the statue that I'm talking about, and she's leaning back like this, and there's this angel, standing over her. Well, so there would be a hysterical woman leaning back in the chair, and standing over her, there would be a man with a weird hand gesture like this, and the big eyes thing, trying to put some ideas into her head. And I think that a whole lot of people think that that's kind of what hypnosis is about. So what I'd like to talk to you about, and I understand that this is a way that we often think about it, but what I'd really like to kind of emphasize with you today is that the hypnosis I want to talk to you about isn't about putting anything into anybody, as much as it is about eliciting from the clients that we work with what really needs to happen. So many of us will start our work with a client where we've been told that a client is going to come to see us because they have trichotillomania. I like that one just because it's just so many letters. It's cheating in Scrabble, but it's a really high point word. They have trichotillomania. So the hypnotist will immediately go to the dictionary, or go to Google, or go to some Facebook group of hypnotists and say, I have a client coming with trichotillomania. Does anybody have a good script for that? Right? Because if we get the right technique, or know the technique to do, because if we get all that in place before the client gets there, then we can do something useful. By the way, Jessica, one of the things I really loved about your talk was just this notion of holding space for people. I think there's so much more wisdom in that than beginning with, I know what to do for you because I read what trichotillomania is about in a book, and I have no way of relating it to a person or to anything else. We don't work with trichotillomania. We work with people. We work with human beings, and what we need to be able to do is to find out where are they and what needs to shift in their experience in order for them to be able to move forward a little more resourcefully. And that's not going to be the same for everybody with trichotillomania. It's not going to be the same for everybody who smokes. It's not going to be the same for everybody who wants to lose weight. That we have to create a technique for every client that we work with if we really want to do what I would call natural hypnosis with people. That it develops, that it evolves as we are in our interaction with them. You can be informed by the technique. So, by the way, I'm a teacher, so one of the things I do is I teach people a whole bunch of processes, okay? And I think having those in there and then forgetting about them is the way to do it. The same way that, I don't know if you appreciate jazz, for example, but if you want to be a jazz musician, you have to know how to run the scales before you can start breaking the rules, before you can start creating something new. You have to understand the structure of things, right? But then ultimately, you can forget about that and you can improvise on the keyboard. Right? In the same way, I really think it's always improvisation. We mentioned Wes Rocky. It's too bad that he wasn't here to talk about improv, but the subject did come up. I think that really is what we're doing. So, for instance, if Mary Beth comes to my office, what I get to do is I get to create with her, or just maybe even better, to discover from her the Mary Beth Kritsky technique. And really be connected with this human being as opposed to this symptom that is presented, and lets me forget who she is. By the way, some hypnotists, I can't help but think about this, will tell you that they have a 100% success rate with smokers. And you know how they know? Because they offer their clients a guarantee. I had a guy tell me this, oh yeah, I tell my client, if it doesn't work, you can come back for free. He says, and none of them ever come back. So I know that I am 100% successful. That's really interesting. It does occur to me that sometimes there are other reasons that a client may not come back. And it isn't necessarily success that's the reason. But when you really establish this heartfelt human connection with another person, that's when the miracles can happen. Well, we've heard of this guy Milton Erickson. You know about Milton, right? By the way, I have to. Here's my caveat about Milton Erickson and about Dave Ellman. Both of them, lovely, contributed to our field, offered so much. And both of them have been dead for over 50 years. And every once in a while, I'll find a client who will say to me, what would Milton do in this situation? Milton didn't live in 2022. He has no idea what this world is like. And the fact that we should seek our guidance from such dated understandings is a little silly. I think what we can do is we can be inspired by Milton. We can be inspired to have that pioneering spirit to continue to press forward. But I promise you that if Milton were alive today, he wouldn't be doing what he was doing in 1975. So a real question is, how can we take that foundation and continue to develop it? The thing about Erickson was his absolute naturalness with people. There are so many books about Milton Erickson's technique, and every one of them seems to be misguided. Every one of them seems to have a different conclusion. And when Erickson read Bandler and Grinder's book, Patterns of the Hypnotic Techniques of Milton H. Erickson, MD, there's 2 volumes of it, transcripts of Milton working and all kinds of things. They sort of tried to describe some processes and techniques. And Erickson says, I found this book very interesting. He wrote the preface, by the way. He said, I found this book very interesting because I discovered a number of things here that I was not aware that I was doing. And what Erickson did was he really connected with people and essentially asked the question, how does this human experience in front of me need to shift and move? And invited the client essentially to direct the process. One of my favorite inductions when I was first learning, I had the good fortune of learning hypnosis from some great people. I spent some time in hypnosis seminars with John Grinder and with Robert Dilts, who you've heard us talk about here. And then I studied with a man named Stephen Gilligan, who was a protege of Milton Erickson's and a great therapist. Still available, still accessible, lives in the San Diego area, by the way, and runs a trance camp, by the way, a 3-week summer, experience every year that is one of the most powerful things that you can do. Stephen was a student at UC Santa Cruz when Bandler and Grinder were putting NLP together. And Stephen says it's a very interesting thing to say. And Stephen, one of the first things he told us about his background with hypnosis, he said, everything I know about hypnosis, I learned from growing up in a dysfunctional, alcoholic, Irish Catholic household. It's an interesting statement. And what you see from Stephen, so Stephen, this young man, a student of Bandler and Grinder's, when they were developing NLP, and a pre-medical student at UC Santa Cruz, tried to commit suicide, and the drama in his life was just overwhelming to him, and one of those things, and I'm relating back to Jessica's talk a minute ago, one of those things that from the outside nobody would have noticed, so a real surprise, when Stephen took this turn. And John Grinder rather lived next door to Gregory Bateson, who was in residence at Santa Cruz. Bateson is the husband of Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, and is the connection between Bandler and Grinder and Milton Erickson. Gregory Bateson and his wife were close friends of Milton and his wife, Betty. And so when Stephen tried to commit suicide, Gregory said, we need to introduce this young man to Milton Erickson. And they took Stephen out to Erickson. And Erickson took Stephen under his wing, which was so lucky for me, and hopefully so lucky for you guys if you get something, from my exposure to him as well that I can pass on. Because more than anybody that I know, from that point on, Stephen separated himself from his family, and every break that he had from school, he actually stayed at the Ericksons. He lived in Erickson's guest house whenever he had the opportunity, and has, in my understanding, with a possible exception of Ernie Rossi, maybe more FaceTime with Milton Erickson than anybody else in the field today. And what he seems to have gotten from Milton Erickson wasn't a collection of techniques. What I would say that he got from Milton Erickson is he received the transmission. And I know that that's a weird way to say it, but I can't think of any other way to express this. That Milton's ability to be with people and to help them move was just an uncanny part of his personality, of his natural way of operating in the world. You know about his own history, of course, that Erickson suffered from polio as a child and was completely paralyzed, and then gradually began to learn how to walk and move his body again. And there's some lovely dramatic stories about that. At one point, when all he had were his arms, so his arms were working, but he still couldn't walk, he couldn't use the lower half of his body, he got in a canoe in Wisconsin, outside of Milwaukee, actually, got on the Wisconsin River and took this canoe across the Wisconsin River to the Mississippi River, and down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, all by himself. This is the kind of this is touching me for a minute. You got to forgive me every once in a while. I think I'm just a big crybaby today. I don't know what the deal is, but God bless Milton Erickson for his determination, for his resilience of spirit, and his ability, I think, to convey that to the people that he worked with, and to give them this sense that you can do this, you can do this. Milton, I think, really sort of knew that from the inside. So anyway, Milton Erickson, been dead for a long time. Some of us are still grieving, but but hopefully what we can get from our study of people like Erickson is not to look for a whole bunch of techniques, but to look for some principles that can really guide the way that we operate. And then when we actually get in the same room with a human being that needs something from us, to be able to say, perhaps indirectly, because they expect you to be the expert, but to say in some way, what is it that you need? Why don't you give me instructions here, and then I'll do my job. So the first thing, when we think about just the naturalness of hypnosis, Erickson said something I think that's interesting and that does apply today, even 50 years later. He was fascinated with a couple of things that Bandler and Grinder did, by the way, and he was appalled by a couple of things that they did. But there's so much discussion in NLP about rapport, and Art gave us a whole lot of information about that yesterday as well, and connecting with people and getting rapport. Erickson said, if he's got somebody, he says, and if I can't hypnotize them, what I'll do is I'll get in rapport with them, and then I'll go into a trance. I think this is an interesting idea. An interesting way to do induction is to create that connection with your client and then begin to alter your own state. Because what we know about rapport is once you've established it, people will follow you. You pace it to get there. And then as you begin to move, they will move with you. So a pretty cool way to go about doing inductions. As I look back at if you look at the demonstrations that Erickson did, and if you look at transcripts of Erickson, what you'll have a hard time finding is, oh God, where was the induction? Erickson was talking to this person for a little while, and the next thing you know, their hands are raising up in the air, and all these kind of things. But there isn't a place where Erickson said, all right, everybody, take a deep breath and close your eyes and relax them all the way to the place where they just won't open. There wasn't anything that was that kind of a, now we're about to do a technique. But there was a conversation that moved in a direction that took people further inside into that special quiet place. I have to talk about this for a minute at least. In my history, I've got some church in my history. Some of you know about this. One of the things that I love to remind people, if you think about what happens when a community comes together, like on Sunday morning for church, is the first thing that happens is singing, typically, right? So everybody sings. Guess what happens when everybody in a room is singing? You have got 50 people or 60 people or 100 people, depending on the church, that are breathing together. You don't get to sing with other people without breathing at the same time. This is how it works. So we've got a room full of people that are breathing together. So step number one is do the breathing exercise. Okay. And at the end of that hymn, there is an amen or something that's this nice closure. And typically, in the Christian community, and this seems to be true with Catholics and Episcopalians and Methodists and all kinds of people, there's something that structurally is almost the same at the beginning of church services. Most of them, there are exceptions, but most of them, the minister says something like, the Lord be with you. Everybody says, and also with you. And then the minister says, let us pray. Okay. Now, bear in mind, we've just had 50 people breathing together. Okay. Then this little bit of a greeting, and then let us pray. And what happens next? Boom. It's a rapid induction. Everybody gets quieter than they were a few minutes earlier. Everybody turns their attention inside in some special way. And it's this thing that nobody ever described it in terms of hypnosis, but I would say it's a rapid induction. It's a pretty rapid induction. So notice just how naturally that process unfolds, and it isn't that anybody is the hypnotist. Well, I don't know what your first experiences with hypnosis were. I have two. One of them I tell all the time, and it's just about being a little kid in church and hallucinating while the walls were shaking from 32-foot organ pipes that I was sitting under. I was a little 6-year-old choir kid with the starched collar and the bow tie. And I remember during the Sanctus, I had this sense that the vault of the cathedral was filled with angels and archangels and all of the hosts of heaven. While we averted our eyes in prayer back in those days, it's a little different now, so we couldn't look at it directly, but we could have this sense of somethingness happening outside of ourselves that was grand and that was magnificent. A later experience that I really relate to even more specifically to hypnosis is when I was at university. We had, I am of the hippie era, so we had a thing called Communiversity on my campus, which was basically free classes that you could take, and they could be offered by anybody that had something to offer. And there are similar things that are still out there in the world, but this was back in those days. And what I took was a yoga class when yoga had just been invented. I know it's, well, let me say it in a different way. When yoga had first really become sort of popularized and folks in the States became aware of it after the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi came and transcendental meditation and people started finding out about this thing called yoga. And what I remember is lying on my back on the floor at the end of the yoga class. And the yoga instructor said, tell your feet to relax. Just send a message to your feet and tell your feet to relax and feel the relaxation developing in your feet. And now send a message to your ankles and tell your ankles to relax and feel the relaxation as they just settle down more and more. Now, I didn't know it was hypnosis. So guess what? I didn't resist. The funny thing is, as soon as you say to somebody, I'm about to do something to you, you create this potential for arm wrestling that I every once in a while I get a hypnotist who says to me, I don't know, I'm going to get Art Emmerich to go under. I'm like, well, maybe that's not the way that you should approach the relationship in the first place. This yoga teacher didn't tell me. Like I said, she didn't say it was hypnosis, but I had an experience and I knew that I could somehow use my mind to communicate, at least with my body, and to have it respond. This was important news to me, and a new discovery. I want to talk a little bit about so here's what are we up to when we're doing hypnosis with somebody? What are we actually trying to make happen? My favorite buzzword of contemporary psychotherapy is reconsolidation. I love this word. It's just so rich. Basically, you got your life organized in a certain way inside of your head. You have certain understandings about the things that are going on around you, and your experience of life is based on those understandings. By the way, from NLP, I think I actually said this yesterday, it isn't so much what's happening in the world that is the issue. It's how we experience what's happening in the world, that is the issue. What does it mean to you? So we all could have a similar event in our lives, and each of us have very different experiences of that event, which is why the idea of a standard technique. How many ways, by the way, do you suppose people could have issues with their weight? How many possible issues are there associated with weight and with weight loss? And yet every once in a while, I'll come up to a hypnotist who says, here's my technique for working with people that want to lose weight. And do they really all have the same issue? Or do we really have to come to appreciate the individuality of them? So what we're doing is our clients have a certain way of thinking about the things that are going on in their life. And what we want to do is we want to take them experientially to a place where they can separate from that for a minute. They can look at it out there. And when they do that, what happens is they have released what Stephen calls the neuromuscular lock. The idea is there are things that we hold on to. Jessica talked about this a little bit, not only in our physiology, but also our mind, the beliefs that we have and stuff, we're holding on to them really tightly because they give us some stability in the world. Hypnosis gives us an opportunity to loosen that hold for a minute. And while it's loosened, we can consider the possibility that maybe there's another way to experience this. And then we can start reframing and shifting and moving things around and coming to a different conclusion. If you think about some of the most significant change events or experiences in your own life, I'm willing to bet you that there's some places where you have changed your mind about something. And that experience of having changed your mind is a big deal. I know I talked to this, maybe some of you might have been at the virtual chapter. I think it came up this last week. When I was a kid, my relationship with my father was really strained for a variety of reasons. I just wasn't who it is that he thought I needed to be, and and he could be really demanding and really difficult to deal with for me at least. And then I was in a seminar. A certain cult that I belonged to in the early 80s called EST. Some of you are familiar with Werner Erhard and EST training, cattle therapy for groups of 60 or so. And we were in a workshop that was called a communication workshop, and they managed to convince us all that we had some important withheld communication. There's something that you are not saying to somebody in your life, and it's the source of all of your problems. This is an interesting thing to do with a group of people. And I found, oh yeah, my dad, whatever. And I wanted to make peace with my dad. And somehow or another, I got the crazy notion that if we could just communicate with one another in a context that allowed us to acknowledge having a loving relationship or to get there. It was a silly thing, but nonetheless, it's where I went with it. And back in those days, we didn't have cell phones. So here was the deal. We're in a hotel ballroom. And the deal is on the break, everybody's going to hit the payphones and they're going to call this person that they're withholding communication from, and they're going to complete that withhold. Okay. Yeah, it was psychiatry was tough in those days. Well, you know, it was. I liked the throwing people up and down in blankets and stuff. That was okay. But yeah, then there were things like this. So I went out to the rank of the bank of payphones. I called my dad, and I said to him, Dad, I want you to know that I love you. And immediately I was like, oh my God, what kind of response is he going to give me? I was braced for for something that was going to be really uncomfortable. And I saved myself from the discomfort. And I saved my father from the discomfort as well, by the way, by saying, and I know that you have always loved me. I don't know what helped me say that, but nonetheless, you know, I said that. And my father's response, by the way, really kind of a silly thing. And again, I don't know if this is a brand name that is no longer available, so you might not get the joke, but several of you will. My father's response to me, because my father was a jokester. Everybody else knows my father as the fun guy. You know, I mean, that it's really kind of fun because he's out there, you know, with everybody. And some of the craziness that those of you who know me that I sort of come up with every once in a while, like, yeah, there's my dad, you know, operating in my own brain. My father said, I said, so Father, I love you, and I want you to know that I know that you have always loved me. And he says, hey, he says, I heard a good one the other day. He says, what do you call an impotent mountain climber? An impotent mountain climber says, I don't know. He says, dry sack on the rocks. This is booze, you know, from the day, right? And I'm like, isn't it interesting that my father's response to this question was to make a joke about impotence when confronted with this thing about, you know, our ability to love one another. But I'll tell you what, I discovered sort of through that interaction and through a little bit of breath work that I did as well, by the way, that those things that were so hurtful to me that my father did, and the criticism and the railing and the, you know, all that stuff, was really his best attempt to try to help me. There are quotes here, I understand, but his best attempt to try to help me to become the sort of person who would have a successful life based upon his understanding of what that was all about. And I'm like, as misguided as it was, all of those things, you know, I have every right to be as angry as I want to be with him, but I don't really want to be angry with him. What I came to recognize was, you know, in his own way, that was his expression of love for me. So now I have a new way of thinking about this experience that changed everything about our relationship with each other from then until my father died. We've all had experiences like that where you change your mind about something and the world becomes a different place. You come to understand something differently or in a new way. Well, that's what we're up to when we're doing hypnosis with people. People are stuck with, I've got a certain way of thinking about the world that creates a whole hell of a lot of anxiety for me. And now we're going to say, well, wait a minute, maybe it could be like this. Maybe there's another way. What else could be the way? So how many of you, if anxiety is one of my favorite things. I love anxiety because it's got so much pep to it, you know. But seriously, I mentioned Communiversity, that free university thing, and in some cities around the country, I don't know if there are any left today, but there were up until maybe 10 years ago. There used to be things called, in some cities it was the Learning Annex, in some cities it was the Knowledge Shop, and different things like this. And what they were was in the trendier neighborhoods of town, you'd find these catalogs little, like 20 or 30 page catalog that just had all these classes listed that people were teaching. And anybody that wanted to teach could pretty much get listed, and have a class in that catalog. You would sign up through the company and the teacher would get like half of the money. But there was this company that would organize it all and, and do all the registrations and stuff like that. And so you could take a class on wine tasting. You could take a class, or yoga or self-hypnosis. By the way, a lot of hypnotists in our profession actually started out by running these kinds of self-hypnosis classes and then gathering people through those for private clients. So I'm wondering if are any of you experts on anxiety? I mean, from a personal standpoint, are you good enough at it that you think that you could teach a class on how to be anxious? Like if somebody didn't know what anxiety was, Robert Dilts used to use as one of his sort of frames for working through new things. He says, I'm an anthropologist from Mars. I've just come to Earth and I've met Earth people for the first time. And we were having a conversation and you said something to me about, I was anxious yesterday. And I go to myself, gosh, on Mars, we don't have anxiety. I don't know anything about that. What is that? Could you tell me about it? Or from a nice NLP frame, I would say, could you teach me how to do it? So does anybody know anxiety well enough to be able to give me some instructions about how would I go about being anxious? Feel free, somebody, raise your hand. Let me chat with somebody. Go ahead, Renee, open up your microphone and tell me what's step one?
Go to a place of what if? What if this happened? What if that happened? If I do this, what would happen? What if? What if? What if? What if?
Yeah.
What if?
Well, yeah. What if I win the lottery? Oh no, anxious though, right? So we've got.
But that would make you anxious. What if? What if you did win the lottery? Then people would start coming out of the woodwork, and then what would happen? And then you would have to invest in it, because if you didn't, and what if? And what if? Oh well, no, we could go there.
And I'd have to get new woodwork, as a matter of fact. Once. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So start doing what if about something. So the thing that's implied in what she's saying is in the future, right? It's anticipatory anxiety. It's like, so this could happen. And if this happens, by the way, then I'm going to go, and then that would happen because of that. And that would cause this to happen. And then, oh my God, right? Right. By the way, when you're doing that inside of your head, because we want a good technique for how to get anxious. When you're doing that inside of your head, is it real? If there's an internal voice that's saying, what if, for example, is that voice really kind of, well, I wonder what, peaceful, easy about it, or in fact,
Hands on your hips, point your finger.
That voice has hands on its hips. That's right. And it points a finger. And by the way, I'll bet you, if we want to amplify the anxiety, what we've got to do is we've got to do it faster and faster as well, right? Because really, what if, like Brer Bear or something, we'll probably get it, right? But a little faster, so that helps, right? There's a whole technique here. What people don't understand is that anxiety is something that we do.
Mm-hmm.
We think that it's something that is happening to us, but it's something that we do. There is an activity involved. There's a certain way that you've got to go about it in order, if you want to be good at being anxious. I'm remembering a Charlie Brown cartoon. Some of you might have seen it. That I hadn't thought about this for a long time until just now. And he's talking to I don't know, to Lucy or to Peppermint Patty or to somebody, and he's looking down. He says, if you want to be depressed, one of the things that you must never do is you must never look up. Like that there's a certain body posture that helps you be depressed. That there's a certain way of holding your eyes that helps you be depressed. There's a certain quality of breathing that's required. And if you don't do it right, you're going to blow it. Isn't it interesting to think that being able to be anxious is a particular kind of expertise? And some people are much better. Some people are Olympic quality, anxiety producers, right? They have mastered it. So one of Virginia Satir's, my favorite things about Virginia Satir is I saw a video of her talking to a woman that had a phobia of elevators. And Virginia says, and so do you do that every time you get in an elevator? And the woman says, well, yes, every single time. And Virginia's, that's amazing. Few people are that consistent about anything, and yet, so just in a casual way, suggesting that this was something that a person does inside. And here's how we do it. I want to give you some examples of a thing. I need to give you a title about this, because there is this approach out there that you can find if you look on the web and stuff, called the 3 principles. It's kind of an interesting thing, and it's the principle of mind, the principle of consciousness, and the principle of thought. Okay, and thought is this thing that really is the source of of a whole lot of trouble. I was working with a friend of mine, Jamie Smart, in England, that I did some training for a number of years. And Jamie sold his company to somebody else. And when he sold the company, the new guy was doing it as a hobby. I was the principal trainer for this company that had been sold, really the only asset that the company had. And it was this rich guy who was looking for some way to spend his money and to spend his time running a seminar business because he thought it would be cool. And he didn't know what he was doing. So there were problems. And in the transition period, Jamie was still connected and involved, my friend. And I said, Jamie, this has to be taken care of, and really fast, by the way, right? This has to be taken care of, and this has to be taken care of, and then there's this problem, and he's not doing that, and we have to take care of this, and we need to call these people, and we need to promote this program. And Jamie stopped me with a good Melissa Tears stop, by the way. He says, Michael, he says, you're just experiencing the effects of your thinking. And I've got to tell Jessica, I wanted to take him with me to the break room and throw something at him, okay, at the moment, right? Because it was just, what do you mean I'm just experiencing the effects of my thinking? These are really real problems, and, right? But in fact, it was the way that I was holding it, the way that I was running it in my head, and all of the what ifs, Renee, that I was generating about why this was so damned important and needed to be taken care of right now. God bless the naive. How wonderful to just not give a shit sometimes, and to be able to just be okay while stuff is going on around you. But inside, whipping up all this incredible turmoil about how bad it is. So here's the thing. Thoughts are moving through your consciousness, one after another, after another, after another, every day of your life. Anybody who's ever tried to meditate will tell you that they've had to confront this notion of this stream of thought that continues to, be in the way. If you go into a subway station in Manhattan, and you go down to the train tracks, one train comes in and goes out, and another train comes in and goes out, and another train comes in and goes out all day long, just like these thoughts move through our mind. If you're standing in the subway station, just because a train pulls in, you don't have to get on that one unless it's going where you want it to go. And we don't really appreciate the fact that we actually have a similar choice with regard to our thoughts. So you're standing in the subway station and the train comes in, and on the front of the train, there's a little thing that says where the train is headed. If the train comes in and it says to hell and back, I think it's perfectly okay to go, I'll wait for the next one. I took that one yesterday. I already know about that one. I'll wait for the next one. And if you get yourself caught in the middle of this anxiety producing pattern and you're onto yourself, see, I think the difference with me after working with this kind of stuff for quite a while, it isn't that I don't do any of those things anymore. It isn't that I don't get anxious anymore. But what I do is I bust myself more often. I become aware more often that, oh my God, look at what I'm doing. Look at where my internal processes are taking me. I could do something different. I could see it and say it and zap it, Jan. Any number of things, but that there are choice points in our experience. And people will tell me, well, Michael, I can't control my thoughts. Well, I beg to differ with you, but you control your thoughts all the time. I have a mother, as so many of us do. But I have a mother who is a good mother. I mean, I don't, and I have to preface it only because I don't want it to sound like I'm saying something bad about my mom, who's a good mother. And I have a baby sister who is 9 years younger than me. Certainly not a baby anymore. She's in her 60s, but she was my baby sister. And when mom would go to the store, if she would take my baby sister with her, the baby sister would be mommy, 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 all the way through the grocery store. And my mother had this capacity to only listen to the things that she really needed to hear from. It wasn't that she ignored her, but, all of that mommy, mommy, mommy would have driven me crazy. But my mother learned how to just kind of let that stuff go on in the background with an alertness for anything that she had to pay attention to. Well, in the same way, I wonder if you start hearing all that stuff in your head, what would be involved in letting that kind of be in the background? Like there's somebody talking back there making a whole hell of a lot of noise about something, but I wonder what's that Oprah this afternoon, It would be a much, much better way to get through the day. So people say, oh, Michael, I cannot control my thinking. So again, I give my mother as an example, but here's another example. Let's say that you have been saving up for the last year because guess what? The Rolling Stones is coming to town. If you're a Rolling Stones fan, substitute, Gilbert O'Sullivan or whoever you like. But if the Rolling Stones are coming to town, or Barry Manilow, God help you, and you've saved up and you've got special seats. I mean, really special seats, and maybe even that kind of extra package that you can pay for where you get a glass of champagne and maybe you get to go backstage even right afterwards. So this is the big deal. I've saved up all year for this. I'm so ready. I'm going to go. Here I am now. I'm sitting there at the Rolling Stones concert. Mick and the guys have just come out on stage. They're right in the middle of Jumping Jack Flash. And in the subway station of my mind, all of a sudden a voice calls out, oh my God, we're having company for dinner tomorrow, and I haven't figured out what it is that I'm going to cook. Maybe I could make that casserole that my mother used to make, but if I want to do that, I have to remember to stop at the grocery store on the way home to get some pearl onions, because you need those pearl onions, to make a good casserole. No, you don't do that. You go, oh my God, I'm going to have company tomorrow night for supper. I haven't figured out what I'm going to, and they go, oh, well, Mick and the guys just say, we'll think about this later. And we do have that internal capacity to go, I'll deal with this later on. So somehow or another, if we can help people become aware that they're actively engaged in the process of creating these emotional states within themselves, then they might just have a chance to be able to start doing something different. Because we can also talk to them about how they can use that same process to create some wonderful experiences, can't we? What do you want to generate inside? What do we want to create today? People come into your office so often and they say, here is a problem. I'm so glad, Jackie, that I'm in your office today, that I'm working with you, and problem, 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 problem. And I'm like, yeah, all that shit's very interesting, but that's not what we're interested in, is it? What do you want to create together? What do you want to build together today now? What is it that we can make that will be wonderful, that will give you the quality of life that you would like to have? I'm looking once again. By the way, this is another way to create anxiety. You can do this, but that's the thing the thing that I think is the most important is to understand how it is that we're about the business of building new experiences for people you know, so that they can be more resourceful. I've heard so much stuff today about great techniques and things like the break room. The break room is one I want to refer to, Jessica, because I love that. I didn't know that there were such places. But I'll tell you what, I come from Oswego, Illinois, very, very small place about 50 miles west of Chicago. When I was a kid in Oswego, the population was 1,500. My high school graduating class had 30 people in it. 27 of those 30 people are Facebook friends of mine today. This is what small towns are like, you know, at least when I was growing up. And what we used to have, because we were a tiny little town, is every year we had a festival called Prairie Fest. And it was just the main street of downtown, you know, all 2 blocks of it, actually. And you know, we didn't have all kinds of fancy rides and all of that sort of stuff. I think there might have been a tractor pull at some point, you know, and those kind of things, as you would expect. But one of the things that was really a star attraction at this event was they had an old car. They had an old car and a sledgehammer. And for 50 cents, you could take the sledgehammer and you could bang on this car a couple of times. And people would just like beat the whole thing up, you know, as a way of getting, you know, getting their expressions. Because we couldn't afford a roller coaster, you know. So why not beat on the car? It's kind of a nice idea. There's a part of me, and I teach people this technique, and essentially it involves and it comes from this car in the Prairie Fest. But the idea is, if you've got an image that continues to sort of haunt you or comes back into your mind and you want to get rid of it, you can project it onto the back windshield of, I call it the 1957 Chevy technique, because I think they're just glorious automobiles. But you project it on the back windshield of this car. And there's the picture there. And now I'm looking at it, and I'm going to take a sledgehammer and I'm going to smack it in the middle. Okay, well, what happens when you hit a windshield with a sledgehammer? It doesn't fall out, does it? It webs out, it distorts. So now, once you've done that, at least in my hypnotic presentation of this, the image is now all distorted. It doesn't look the same way that it did a minute ago. In fact, it might even look kind of interesting with the light reflecting off of it, like modern stained glass or something. And then I suggest, at least, that now we can hit the window a second time, and when we do, it just drops out entirely. And you can look through the car and you can see a clock on the dashboard and tell me what time it is. Yeah, and that's just to get them to move off of the image and stuff. There's sort of a reason for that. But so it's a nice one, isn't it? That if what you've done is you do that a few times until the image. So I'll have them, now that we've distorted it by the first hit and it fell out. Now whatever's left, you can put that on the windshield and you can do it again, and it gets even more distorted until you can't even recognize it and it doesn't generate any response anymore. Now, some people will say, and if you've got a client who's one of these people, bear this in mind. Some people will suggest that that's a little too aggressive. I was sort of surprised to hear that, because I just loved the idea myself. It works for me real well. But you know, you got folks that work out well in the break room, and we've got some other people that would probably do better finger painting something beautiful and lovely, you know, and doing it in a softer, gentler way. But I guess, you know, my time is already running out. So as I'm wrapping this up, what I really want to encourage you to do is to get creative with your intervention. Jessica talked about a book, you know, and she described it in a certain way. Now, for those of you who are scientifically oriented, I have news for you. There's no book. Not really. So Jessica, how dare you? You know, or the vacuum. I love the vacuum. I think that's kind of a nice thing. And so many of us have told our clients that have a headache or some condition, take that headache, take that condition, put it in a balloon or in a basket and attach it to a balloon and watch it move away. And as it moves away, you feel the relief of just letting go of that. And it's so much more pleasant as it moves farther and farther away, and you really experience this freedom. No balloon, no basket, Not really. But we're talking about manipulating consciousness, and we often do it through the use of metaphors, as ways to do it. I do understand, according to science, research has shown that if you use a wooden bucket, it's more effective than a metal pail. One more thing that I'll give you on the way out of here. It comes from Scott Sandlin. Some of you know who Scott Sandlin is. He's the guy that put together Hypno Thoughts and runs this big conference every year, and used to be a board member of IMDHA. And Scott, I call this the Sandlin hand technique. He had some name that was much more scientific, by the way, but I'm not a scientist, so I like the Sandlin hand technique. And basically, you could use this for pain, and I've seen it presented in that context, or you could use it for fear or anxiety. So just for talking, let's say that we're using it for anxiety. And what you say to a client, that they say, well, I've got all this anxiety, and you can ask them, I think I've got a way to work with you, but I wonder if it would be okay with you if we took this anxiety and we made it just a little bit worse, just for a moment. If that meant that you could get rid of it once and for all, would that be okay with you? And most people will say, well, a lot worse. No, just a little bit worse, just for a moment. Okay. Now, what you're doing is you're creating a model here. Because I don't know if this would really work if I hadn't just offered an indirect suggestion. But here's the suggestion. Put that anxiety in my hand. So you say to your client, put that anxiety in your hand, or put your fear in my hand, or put your pain in my hand, whatever it is, put it in my hand. Okay. Now, I don't know what that means, because again, the scientist in me says, well, okay, anxiety is in my hand. And I say, now I want you to notice. So they're looking, here it is over there. Notice that what's happened immediately is you've created dissociation. Right? There's the anxiety. It's not here. I just put it over there. Okay. And I'm going to look at it for a minute. And then the therapist says, now I want you to notice what happens as I move my hand just a little bit closer to you. And what you'll see is the people going, pulling back, right? So they have created in their thinking the experience that as this gets closer to me, it's going to get more and more intense. Okay. So guess what that means? Buckets and balloons, notice what happens as I move it a little bit farther away. And they go, oh, that feels so much better. And even farther, and I'll take it over here. I'll get up, I'll walk halfway across the room. I'll say, and look at when it's way over here, and they go, yeah, I hardly feel it all anymore. And in my office, there's a little restroom. So I'll open the door and disappear for a moment and flush the toilet so that they can hear it. And they'll go, well, gosh, that's interesting. I don't even feel it anymore. And I've had people have these incredible transformations. And what did we just do is invite them to have a way to think about this transition so that they can have it as a part of their experiential reality. They now know what it feels like for that anxiety to lessen, diminish, and disappear. And once they know that, they will never be the same again. And that's the beauty of these things. So Melissa Tiers loves to say, we're making all this shit up. I'm like, that's right. That's right. So keep making up more shit. Make up some really good shit that will make a difference for the people that you live with. Care about the people that you live with. I don't know what they taught you in your schools, but it's worth it to actually, Stephen Gilligan wrote a book called The Courage to Love about doing therapy. I think that's a beautiful way, a beautiful, beautiful way to think about it. And here's my closing. I can't help but think that there's nothing that will be as useful for us in hypnosis as having a good way to think about what it is that we're doing, to have a good paradigm. And so forgive me for reaching into my religious model once again and adjust this however you need to, but get the principle of this and notice what a difference it makes. Somebody that I deeply admire is Mother Teresa. And you know, Mother Teresa, and I know some people have got this all kind of political stuff about that. Go wherever you have to go about it, that's great. Fix it to suit your needs. But Mother Teresa was, because she was a nun after all, bride of Christ, right? This is her devotion. This is serving her Lord is the thing that matters to her more than anything else. She said, somebody asked her, a reporter asked her one day, they said, Mother Teresa, how is it that you can go down by the river every day and work with this population, these disenfranchised, I call them the Statue of Liberty people. You know, on the plaque of the Statue of Liberty, it's you're tired, you're weary, nobody wants to be this guy, you know, and the list of how miserable life can be for people. She worked with a very challenging population that was in a lot of pain and suffering and starving and all of that stuff, day after day after day after day. And the reporter said, how do you do this every day and it doesn't get to you? And she said, well, when I see these people, I see our Lord Christ in some of his more distressing disguises. This is an interesting idea that as she looked at her clients, if I can use that word for just a moment, she saw them in a certain way that absolutely empowered what she was doing. Here is an opportunity for me to be of service to my Lord, the most important thing that there is to me. So I'm not telling you have to do that one. I'm just suggesting to you that however it is that you think about what you're doing will play a role in how you experience the doing of it. So what does it mean to you to be a hypnotist? What does it mean to you to be interacting with people at the level at which we interact with them? Who do you see across from you? I believe in evolutionary hypnosis, a whole other talk that I could give you. But the bottom line is that person sitting across from me is an evolving spirit, and something wonderful wants to happen through them. It's why discomfort was generated in them when it wasn't, and it's why they came to see you. Milton Erickson says your clients are your clients because they've lost rapport with their own unconscious mind. And our job is to reintroduce them, to reconnect them with their own best self. So when you sit and you look at that person across from you and you say, there is a wunderkind waking up, wanting to become something wonderful and expressive in the world, and I have the privilege to be able to support and to witness that process, then all of the work that you do can be a joy for you. And isn't that wonderful? And rather than searching for techniques now, the question is, how can I be most effectively with this person in their unfoldment as they evolve and progress in the world? Okay, so it's been lovely talking with you this morning. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Michael.